The painting had hung in the Dunmore living room for as long as I could remember, 6 feet wide, oil on canvas, 5 generations of Dunmores, each name written in careful black lettering, branching outward like the roots of an old tree. My grandfather Patrick had commissioned a new version every 20 years. It was a tradition he considered sacred. A family that knows where it came from, he used to say, can never truly be lost. At his memorial service, I walked into that living room and looked at the painting. My name was not there, not misplaced, not misspelled. Gone, completely and deliberately gone, as if I'd never been born into this family at all. My father, Raymond Dunmore, stood across the room, speaking to relatives in a low voice. I heard the words clerical error and the artist made a mistake and we'll have it fixed. My brother Colton nodded beside him, smooth and convincing as always. My mother Sylvia found me standing in front of the painting. She touched my arm. "Don't make a scene," she whispered. "Not today, not here." I didn't make a scene. Instead, I thought about the small blue notebook sitting in my bag, the one my grandfather had given me 6 years ago, the one my father had no idea existed. And I thought about Jonathan Reardon, my grandfather's attorney, who had called me that morning with a question that changed everything. "Miss Dunmore, did your grandfather ever tell you about the secondary registry?" He had. And that was exactly what my father should have been afraid of all along. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. Let me tell you about the Dunmores. Not the version my father tells at dinner parties. Not the version printed on the company website for Dunmore Property Group with the professional headshots and the carefully chosen words about 4 generations of Pacific Northwest excellence. I mean the real version, the one that lived inside the walls of our house on Crest Haven Drive in Spokane, Washington, the one I grew up inside, quietly trying to take up as little space as possible. My grandfather, Patrick Dunmore, built everything. He came to Spokane in the 1960s with $40 a trade license and a stubbornness that bordered on legendary. He bought a single lot on the east side of the city, built a 2-family home. With his own hands, rented 1 unit, lived in the other. Then he bought another lot. Then another. By the time my father Raymond was born, Patrick Dunmore owned 12 properties across Spokane County. By the time I was born, it was closer to 40. Grandpa Patrick was the kind of man who kept records of everything. Not just financial records, everything. He wrote down the date of every important conversation. He kept a ledger of every promise made and kept and broken within the family. He photographed every property before and after. And once every 20 years, he commissioned a new version of the Dunmore family tree, painted by a local artist, hung in the living room, treated like a sacred document. A family that doesn't know its own story, he used to tell me, is a family that can be rewritten by whoever shouts the loudest. I didn't understand what he meant when I was young. I do now. There were 4 of us in the immediate family: Raymond Dunmore, my father, Sylvia Dunmore, my mother, Colton Dunmore, my brother, 5 years older than me, broad-shouldered, charming, in the way that men are charming when they have never once been told no. And me, Iris, the younger one, the quiet one, the one who read history books at the dinner table and asked too many questions about things that didn't concern her. Raymond Dunmore was not a cruel man in the way that people imagine cruelty. He didn't shout often. He didn't throw things. He was worse than that. He was precise, He had a specific idea of what a Dunmore should look like, should sound like, should be capable of, and he applied that idea like a measuring tape to every person around him. Colton passed every measurement. I failed most of them. The one that mattered most to Raymond was presence, the ability to walk into a room and command it, to shake hands firmly and speak without hesitation and make people feel, within 30 seconds, that they were in the presence of someone important. Colton had it naturally. He walked into rooms the way sunlight walks into rooms, sudden and warm and impossible to ignore. I didn't have it. Not then. I had what my third-grade teacher called expressive hesitation, a clinical way of saying that when I was nervous, my words came slowly. My hands shook. In front of groups, I sometimes went silent mid-sentence, not because I didn't know what to say, but because my body refused to cooperate with my mind. It was something I would largely outgrow by my mid-20s, something I would learn to manage so well that colleagues who met me later in life never believed me when I mentioned it. But Raymond didn't know the version of me that outgrew it. He only knew the 9-year-old who stood up at the Dunmore family reunion. 43 relatives gathered in the backyard of the Cresthaven house, the summer sun, heavy and gold over the Spokane River Valley, and froze. I had prepared a short presentation about the Dunmore family history. 2 minutes. Index cards. I had practiced for 3 weeks. I got through 40 seconds before my hands began to shake so badly that I dropped the cards. I bent to pick them up. When I straightened, I looked for my father's face in the crowd. His chair was empty. He had walked inside. I don't know exactly when. I only know that when I looked up, he was gone. No one mentioned it afterward, not my mother, not Colton. Not even Grandpa Patrick, who came and squeezed my shoulder and said quietly, "You did fine, sweetheart. You did just fine." He was lying, and we both knew it, and I loved him for it anyway. That was the first time I understood that, in Raymond Dunmore's eyes, I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be raised. The system in our household was not complicated. It simply was what it was. The way weather is, what it is, not personal, not negotiable, simply present every single day. Colton school events, Raymond attended every one. Football games, debate, competitions. The Regional Business Leadership Conference Colton participated in during his junior year of high school. Raymond sat in the front row. He took photographs. He shook hands with Colton's coaches and teachers afterward and said with genuine pride, "That's my son, my school events. My mother attended when she could." Raymond attended twice in 12 years, once, because Grandpa Patrick was also coming, and it would have looked strange for him not to, and once by accident because he had confused the date with a different event entirely, and arrived to find me already on stage receiving an award for academic excellence. He left before the ceremony ended. I saw him go. He didn't wave. The contrast was not subtle. It was not the kind of thing a child misreads or imagines. It was a pattern repeated with such consistency that by the time I was 12 years old, I had stopped expecting anything different. Expectation requires hope. I had learned to operate without it. What I had instead was a grandfather who noticed everything Raymond ignored. It was the summer I turned 12 that Grandpa Patrick first sat with me in his study, a wood-paneled room on the second floor of the Cresthaven house, smelling of old paper and cedar, and showed me his record-keeping system. The leather-bound ledgers, the photograph albums organized by property and year, and one other item which he did not explain fully that day. A small notebook with a dark blue cover filled with his handwriting in 2 colors of ink, black for most entries and red for a small number of them. "What does the red mean?" I asked. He smiled. Not the big smile he used in public, the smaller private one. It means something that cannot be argued with, he said. Something permanent. He closed the notebook before I could read any of the red entries. But I had seen enough to notice one thing. My name appeared in red. I didn't know what it meant. I was 12 years old, sitting in my grandfather's study on a warm July afternoon in Spokane, and I filed the image away in the back of my mind the way I filed away everything that didn't yet make sense, carefully, completely certain that one day I would understand it. I didn't know it then, but that afternoon in his study was the first move in a game my grandfather had already decided I would win. The years between 12 and 18 were not dramatic. That is perhaps the most honest thing I can say about them. There was no single catastrophic event, no screaming match that split the family in two, no moment so terrible that it announced itself clearly as a turning point. There is only the slow, steady accumulation of small things, each one manageable on its own, each one unremarkable in isolation, that together formed a picture so clear it could not be misread. I learned to read that picture by the time I was 14. I simply chose for a long time not to say it out loud. The first thing you need to understand about Colton is that he was genuinely likable. That made everything harder. If he had been openly cruel, if he had gloated or taunted or made my life deliberately difficult, I could have pointed to something concrete and said, this is what is happening, this is wrong. But Colton didn't do any of that. He was warm with me in the way that people are warm when they have never had to consider you as competition. He ruffled my hair when I was small. He let me sit with his friends sometimes when they came over on Friday nights. He called me kid in an affectionate tone that made everyone around us smile. What he also did quietly, consistently, without ever appearing to do it on purpose, was make sure that Raymond's attention stayed on him. A school project I finished early became a conversation about Colton's upcoming baseball tryouts. A grade I was proud of became a segue into Colton's GPA and whether it was strong enough for the business school Raymond had already decided he would attend. I would start a sentence at the dinner table, and Colton would finish it, not rudely, just smoothly redirecting the current of the conversation, the way a stone redirects a stream. He didn't even seem aware he was doing it. Raymond never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't consider it worth addressing. Sylvia noticed. I know she did because sometimes in the kitchen after dinner, she would touch my arm and say something like, "Your father's just under a lot of pressure right now," or, "Colton has a lot on his plate this semester." She was not defending them exactly, she was explaining them, as if the reason for a thing was the same as a reason to accept it. I stopped expecting her to do more than that somewhere around my 15th birthday. That birthday is worth describing. For Colton's 15th birthday, Raymond had rented out the private dining room at Clinker Dagger, a restaurant perched above the Spokane River with floor-to-ceiling windows and a prix-fixe menu that started at $90 per person, 22 guests, a custom cake from the French bakery on Monroe Street, 3 tiers, Colton's initials in gold fondant. Raymond stood at the head of the table and gave a toast that lasted 6 minutes. I counted. He talked about Colton's future, about the Dunmore name, about legacy. For my 15th birthday, Sylvia made a sheet cake from a box mix, yellow cake chocolate frosting. She wrote, "Happy Birthday, Iris," in careful letters that listed slightly to the left. There were 5 of us at the table, my parents, Colton, Grandpa, Patrick, and me. Raymond arrived 20 minutes late from a property viewing. He sat down, accepted a slice of cake, checked his phone twice, and left the table before I finished eating. Grandpa Patrick stayed until 9 in the evening. He brought me a book, a first edition genealogical survey of Irish immigrant families in the Pacific Northwest, found at an estate sale in Walla Walla. He had driven 2 hours each way to get it. Inside the front cover, he had written in his careful handwriting, "For Iris, who understands that the most important stories are the ones other people forgot to tell, I still have that book. It sits on my desk at work." The second event happened the autumn I was 17. I had been accepted on full academic scholarship to the University of Washington in Seattle, History Department. It was not a small thing. The scholarship covered full tuition housing and an annual research stipend of $8,000. I had applied without telling Raymond, partly because I already knew what he would say, and partly because I wanted to have the answer before I had to hear the question. I told the family at dinner on a Thursday evening in October. I slid the acceptance letter across the table. Sylvia read it first. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." She meant it. I could tell she meant it. Raymond picked up the letter, read it, set it down. "History," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "History and archival studies," I said. "The research program is one of the best in the—" "History doesn't build anything." He picked up his fork. "It just records what other people built." He did not mention the scholarship. Not that evening. Not the following week. Not ever, as far as I can remember. 3 days later, he flew Colton to San Francisco for a weekend, a reward, Raymond said, for closing his first client referral for Dunmore Property Group. Colton was 18 years old and had passed along a neighbor's phone number to Raymond's office. That was the referral. Raymond spent an estimated $2,400 on flights, hotel, and dinners at restaurants I could not have afforded in my 20s. I drove myself to Seattle 6 weeks later in a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a broken rear defroster. Sylvia stood in the driveway and waved until I turned the corner. Raymond was at the office. Grandpa Patrick called me that evening after I'd carried the last box up to my dormitory room. "Are you settled?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. "Good." A pause. "Iris, I need you to do something for me. I need you to pay attention up there. Not just to your studies, to everything. The way records are kept, the way they're filed, the way people hide things in plain sight inside documents that look ordinary." Another pause. "Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. I didn't ask why. With Grandpa Patrick, the why always came later. "Good girl," he said quietly. "I'll explain the rest when you come home for Christmas." He never fully explained it that Christmas or the next. He gave me pieces slowly, over years, the way you give someone a map, one section at a time, making sure they understand each road before you show them where it leads. I understood by the time I graduated that he was teaching me something specific, something that went beyond academic interest in genealogical records, something that had to do with the Dunmore family itself. What I didn't understand yet was how urgent that lesson would one day become. The worst part wasn't what Raymond said at the dinner table that October night. The worst part wasn't the San Francisco trip or the absent wave or any single moment I could point to and name. The worst part was what happened 3 weeks after I moved to Seattle when Grandpa Patrick called me again, his voice quieter than usual, and said 7 words I would spend the next decade trying to understand. "Iris, your father has been in my files." "Your father has been in my files." 7 words. I replayed them for days after that phone call. Grandpa Patrick didn't elaborate, not that night. He said he was tired and that we would talk more at Christmas. His voice had a careful, measured quality that I had learned to read over the years. It wasn't panic. It was something more controlled than panic. The tone of a man who had anticipated something, and was now watching it begin to unfold exactly as he expected. I waited. I went back to my dormitory room in Seattle and I waited. I opened my genealogy textbooks and I read about provenance and chain of custody and the legal weight of original documents versus copies. I told myself I was studying. I was not studying. I was preparing. I just didn't know yet for what. Christmas that year was quiet in the specific way that Dunmore family Christmases were always quiet surface warmth over a frozen foundation. Sylvia cooked. Colton arrived with a new watch and a story about a deal he had almost closed. Raymond sat at the head of the table, and the conversation moved around him the way water moves around a rock, shaping itself to his presence without ever acknowledging that the rock was the reason for the shape. After dinner, Grandpa Patrick asked me to help him carry dishes to the kitchen. We stood at the sink together for a few minutes, water running, voices low. I found things missing, he said without preamble. Not taken, copied. Your father went through my filing cabinet in the study, the locked one. I keep a hair across the latch. Old habit. He paused. The hair was broken. What did he copy? The registry pages. The original ones, the ones that go back to your great-grandfather. He handed me a dish to dry. He's been watching how I structure the inheritance documents, watching for years. I think he's been planning something since before you were born. He looked at me sideways. You understand what I'm telling you. I understood. In genealogical terms, what Grandpa Patrick was describing was a predatory audit. Someone mapping the structure of a document system, not out of curiosity, but out of intention. Looking for gaps, looking for leverage, looking for the cleanest place to make a change that would be hardest to detect. He wants to control what the registry says, I said. Grandpa Patrick turned off the tap, dried his hands slowly. He wants to control what it says about you specifically, he said. Colton is not the problem. Colton will do what Raymond tells him. He stopped, started again. You ask questions, Iris. You always have. Raymond has never known what to do with someone who asks questions. He didn't say anything more that night. But 3 days later, before I drove back to Seattle, he called me into his study one more time. He opened the locked filing cabinet, the real one, not the decoy he kept in the corner, and took out the dark blue notebook. He opened it to the last page of entries, pointed to my name written in red ink in his careful architectural handwriting. Do you know what this means? He asked. Red ink in a Celtic tradition family registry. I said slowly, means primary heir, the person designated to receive the family seat. I looked up at him. Grandpa, that's a significant legal designation if it's registered properly. It is registered properly, he said. Jonathan Reardon has the certification documents. He's been holding them for 3 years. He closed the notebook, held it out to me. Take this, keep it somewhere. Raymond cannot access. Do not tell anyone you have it. Not Colton, not your mother. Not yet. I took the notebook. It weighed almost nothing. 140 pages of dark blue cardboard and yellowed paper. It felt in that moment like holding a door that had been locked for a very long time. Why are you giving this to me now? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were the same deep gray they had always been, steady and clear and full of something I couldn't quite name. Because I'm 73 years old, he said simply, and Raymond is not going to wait much longer. He was right. Raymond did not wait much longer. The changes were gradual, which was the point. A document reordered here, a reference removed there. Over the following 4 years, while I completed my degree in Seattle and began my postgraduate work in archival studies, Raymond systematically worked through the Dunmore family records. Not destroying them, that would have been too obvious, too easily challenged. What he did was subtler and, in its way, more ruthless. He substituted copies for originals. He filed amended versions of registry pages with the county, each change small enough to appear clerical, the cumulative effect large enough to matter. He built a paper trail that to anyone who hadn't studied document forensics looked entirely legitimate. By the time I graduated from the University of Washington, magna cum laude, with a thesis on contested genealogical records in Pacific Northwest settler families, which my department chair described as the most forensically rigorous student work I have encountered in 20 years of teaching, Raymond had been rewriting the Dunmore family records for the better part of a decade. My graduation ceremony was held on a Saturday in June in Seattle. The auditorium held approximately 800 people. Grandpa Patrick sat in the third row. He had driven 4 hours from Spokane alone because his doctor had restricted him from flying. He wore his good suit, the navy one he kept for occasions he considered genuinely important. He stood when my name was called. He was the only person in our section who stood. Raymond and Sylvia arrived 40 minutes after the ceremony ended. They had attended Colton's housewarming party that morning. Colton had just purchased a condominium in Spokane's South Hill neighborhood with a down payment that Raymond had quietly provided. $45,000, as I would learn later. Raymond shook my hand in the parking lot outside the auditorium, said, "Congratulations," and checked his watch within the first 30 seconds. Sylvia hugged me. She whispered, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." And I believe she was. I believe she was genuinely, completely proud of me in the way that someone can be proud and helpless at the same time. Proud enough to feel it, not strong enough to act on it. That was always Sylvia's particular kind of failure, not malice, just the absence of courage at every moment it was needed. Grandpa Patrick took me to dinner that evening, just the two of us at a small Italian restaurant near the university. He ordered pasta and a glass of red wine and listened for 2 hours while I talked about my research, my plans, the position I had been offered at the Washington State Historical Society in Spokane. "Come home," he said when I told him about the job. "Come back to Spokane. I want you close." I took the position. I moved back to Spokane in August and rented a small apartment on the north side of the city, 12 minutes from the Cresthaven house. For the next 2 years, I visited Grandpa Patrick every Sunday. We sat in his study, and he told me stories about the Dunmore family, the real stories, the ones not in the official version, the ones he had been keeping in his ledgers for 50 years. And one Sunday afternoon in October, 2 years after I came home, he told me something that changed the entire shape of everything I thought I understood. "I've been to see Jonathan Reardon 3 times in the past year," he said quietly. "I've made arrangements, very specific arrangements." He looked at his hands. "Whatever Raymond does, and he will do something, Iris. I am certain of it now. There is a structure in place that he cannot touch. Not legally, not without exposing himself completely." He paused. "The blue notebook," he said. "When the time comes, take it to Jonathan. He will know what to do." I drove back to my apartment that evening in the cool October dark, the Spokane streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, the blue notebook in the bag on my back seat. Grandpa Patrick died on a Tuesday morning in April. Not dramatically, not in a hospital with tubes and machines and a family gathered around a bed. He died the way he had lived quietly on his own terms in the leather armchair in his study with a cup of tea gone cold on the side table and a genealogical survey of County Kerry, Ireland open in his lap. The housekeeper found him at 8:30 in the morning. The coroner said he had been gone since sometime before midnight. I got the call at 6:45 in the morning before I had left for work. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time after I hung up. I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there in the gray April light coming through my bedroom window and thought about a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago when he had looked at his hands and said, "Whatever Raymond does, and he will do something, Iris. I am certain of it now." He had been certain. He had been right. And he had not waited for Raymond to move first. I thought about the blue notebook sitting on the top shelf of my closet behind a box of archival files. Then I got up, got dressed, and drove to the Cresthaven house. The memorial service was held 12 days later on a Saturday at the house on Cresthaven Drive. Raymond had organized everything. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived. Not the flowers, not the catered food, not the 64 relatives and family friends filling every room of the house. What I noticed first was how completely Raymond had taken control of the physical space. He had rearranged the furniture. He had replaced 2 of the framed photographs in the hallway photos that had included me prominently with others that did not, and on the living room wall in the exact spot where the previous Dunmore family tree had hung for 19 years, there was a new painting. It was larger than the old one. The frame was heavier, darker, the lettering was more elaborate. It looked at a glance like an upgrade, a grander, more formal version of the tradition Grandpa Patrick had maintained his whole life. I stood in front of it for a long time. The Dunmore family tree, 5 generations rendered in careful black lettering on aged cream canvas. Patrick Dunmore at the root, Raymond below him branching left, Sylvia beside Raymond, Colton below them with his name in slightly heavier ink, the visual emphasis of an heir apparent. I traced the branches with my eyes the way I trace document structures at work, methodically, starting at the top, moving downward, checking every line. I reached the place where my name should have been. There was nothing there, not a blank space, not a gap. The branch simply did not exist. The artist, or whoever had instructed the artist, had drawn the tree as though Raymond Dunmore had only one child, as though I had never been born into this family at all. I stood there for what felt like a very long time. The room was full of noise behind me, conversations overlapping, someone laughing too loudly near the fireplace, the sound of ice in glasses and plates being set down on tables. None of it reached me. I was standing inside a specific kind of silence that I recognize from my work, the silence of a document that has been deliberately altered, the silence of a record that has been made to lie. I heard Raymond's voice behind me, smooth and practiced. "The artist made a clerical error. We'll have it corrected." I turned around. He was standing 6 feet away, speaking to my father's cousin from Walla Walla, a broad man named Dennis, who had driven 3 hours for the service and was already on his 2nd glass of bourbon. Dennis nodded sympathetically. "These things happen," he said. "Shame, though." Raymond's eyes moved to mine for exactly 2 seconds, then back to Dennis. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look caught. He looked like a man executing a plan that was proceeding exactly as intended. Colton appeared at Raymond's elbow, unhurried, pleasant, the easy smile already in place. "We've got the original registry documents being reviewed," he told Dennis confidently. "It's just an administrative thing, should be sorted within the month." He glanced at me. Briefly, his expression said nothing at all. That was the moment I understood that Colton had known. Not just guessed known. He had known about the painting before today. He had known about the amended registry documents. He had been part of the scaffolding of this plan in the quiet, useful way that he was always part of things, never visibly responsible, always structurally necessary. My mother found me 20 minutes later near the back hallway. "Iris!" She took my arm gently. Her voice was low and strained. "I'm sorry about the painting. I didn't know he was going to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It's just a painting. It doesn't change anything real." I looked at her. "He filed a sworn affidavit with the county mom." I kept my voice very quiet. "It's not just a painting." Her face changed. Something moved behind her eyes, not surprise. Recognition she already knew. "Don't do this today," she whispered. "Not here. Not at Patrick's memorial." "Did you know before he filed it?" She didn't answer. She squeezed my arm once, then let go and moved back into the crowd. I watched her go, watched the way she smoothed her expression as she walked the practiced transition from private distress to public composure that she had been performing my entire life. I stood in the hallway alone. I found Grandpa Patrick's study at the end of the evening, after most of the guests had gone. I sat in his armchair, the one they had found him in, and looked around the room. The locked filing cabinet was still there. The ledger shelf was intact. The photograph of County Kerry, Ireland, that had hung above his desk for 40 years was still in its place, but the small framed document that had always sat on the corner of his desk, a certified copy of the original Dunmore family registry, signed by the county registrar in 1982, was gone. I checked the desk drawers. Empty. I checked the cabinet beneath the bookshelf. Nothing. Raymond had been thorough. I had to give him that. He had been methodical and patient and thorough, and he had timed it perfectly the days between Patrick's death and the memorial service, when the house was accessible and the attention of everyone who might have noticed was elsewhere. What Raymond did not know, what he could not have known, because Grandpa Patrick had told no one but me and Jonathan Reardon, was that the certified copy on the desk had always been a copy. A carefully maintained, deliberately placed copy. The original had been in a bank vault in Walla Walla since 2012, and the blue notebook, the one that contained the red ink entry that changed everything, was on the top shelf of my closet behind a box of archival files 12 minutes away. I sat in my grandfather's armchair in the quiet of his study and thought about what he had told me years ago about documents and the people who alter them. The most common mistake a forger makes, he had said, once, is assuming that destroying the copy destroys the truth. The truth has a way of existing in places people forget to look. Raymond had forgotten to look. I left the study, turned off the light, and walked down the hallway toward the front door. Raymond was in the living room, speaking to the last remaining guests, his back to me. He didn't see me leave. That night, I made a decision. Not an emotional one, not the kind made in the heat of grief or anger. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had memorized 3 years ago but never used. Jonathan Reardon's office was on the 14th floor of the Fernwell building in downtown Spokane, a converted early 20th century office block with high ceilings and windows that looked out over Riverfront Park. I had walked past that building hundreds of times on my way to the Historical Society. I had never had a reason to go inside. Until now. I arrived at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the memorial service. I had the blue notebook in my bag. I had also brought 3 other items: a certified copy of my birth certificate, A notarized letter from my department chair at the Historical Society attesting to my professional qualifications in archival forensics, and a folder containing photocopies of the original Dunmore registry pages, the ones Grandpa Patrick had quietly given me over the course of several Sundays, 1 or 2 pages at a time, across the last 4 years of his life. I had been collecting them without fully understanding why. I understood now. Jonathan Reardon was a small, precise man in his mid-60s with silver hair and the careful stillness of someone who had spent 40 years listening to families destroy themselves over money. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and folded his hands on the surface in front of him. "Your grandfather spoke about you often," he said. "He was very specific about you." "What did he say?" "He said you were the only member of the Dunmore family who understood that a document is not the truth. It is only a record of what someone wanted the truth to appear to be." A pause. He said that distinction would matter eventually. "It matters now," I said. I put the blue notebook on his desk. We spoke for 2 hours that morning. Jonathan walked me through everything, the full architecture of what Grandpa Patrick had constructed over 15 years, piece by piece, with the patience of a man who understood that the most durable structures are the ones built slowly. The blue notebook had been registered as a supplemental testamentary exhibit under Oregon revised statutes, specifically the provision that allows a testator to designate an authenticated handwritten document as a binding addendum to a formal will. Grandpa Patrick had completed the registration process in 2010, 15 years before his death. The certification had been witnessed by Jonathan Reardon himself and notarized by a retired county judge named Patricia Olson, who had since passed away, but whose notarial records were preserved in the state archive. The notebook designated in explicit language the holder of the red ink entry as the primary heir to the Dunmore family seat, specifically the Cresthaven Drive property, and 31% of the total estate assets. My name was the only name written in red ink. "There's more," Jonathan said. He opened a drawer and removed a manila envelope thick with documents. "In 2012, your grandfather commissioned an independent archival firm in Portland to create and maintain a certified original of the complete Dunmore family registry, every generation, every entry, every notation as it existed on August 14th, 2012. That original is held in a safety deposit box at Banner Bank in Walla Walla. Your grandfather added your name to the authorized access list in 2019. I sat very still. "He knew," I said. "He knew Raymond was already altering the documents." "He had suspected it since 2009. Jonathan said quietly. "When he found the hair broken on the filing cabinet, it confirmed what he already believed." He set the envelope down carefully. "He spent the next 15 years making sure that everything Raymond might alter had an unalterable counterpart somewhere Raymond couldn't reach." The room was very quiet. I thought about my father's face at the memorial service, the practiced smoothness of it, the 2-second glance he had given me in front of the painting, the glance that said, "This is already done, and there is nothing you can do about it." I thought about Colton easy and confident beside him saying, "It's just an administrative thing." I thought about Sylvia in the hallway whispering, "Don't do this today," her eyes already knowing everything, her hands already choosing to do nothing. Something shifted inside me that had been shifting for a long time, degree by degree, and now reached a final position it would never move from again. "When is the formal will reading?" I asked. 3 weeks from Thursday," Jonathan said. Raymond has already submitted his amended registry documents to the court. He filed them the day after the memorial service. He looked at me steadily. He's moving quickly because he believes the window is open. He doesn't know about the supplemental exhibit or the Walla Walla deposit. He won't know until the reading. That is correct. I picked up the blue notebook from his desk, held it for a moment, put it back down. I'll be there, I said. The 3 weeks between that meeting and the will reading were the strangest of my life. I went to work every day. I sat at my desk at the Washington State Historical Society, and I restored other families' records, a Spokane mining family whose ledgers had been damaged in a flood, a Japanese-American family tracing documents lost during internment, an elderly woman from the Spokane tribe seeking evidence of her grandmother's land allotment. I did the work carefully and completely the way I always did. At night, I went home to my apartment and I sat with the blue notebook and I read every entry Grandpa Patrick had made across 40 years of careful private documentation. His handwriting was consistent throughout, the same architectural precision at 72 that it had been at 30. The red ink entries were few, 7 in total across all the pages. 3 were names of properties. 1 was a legal citation, 2 were dates, and 1 was my name, Iris Margaret Dunmore, primary heir, family seat, by merit of character and continuity of purpose. I read those words many times in those 3 weeks. Not for reassurance. I had moved beyond needing reassurance from that family long ago. I read them because they were my grandfather's handwriting, because he had written them while he was alive and thinking clearly and knew exactly what he was doing, because he had chosen with full knowledge of what Raymond was capable of to write my name in red ink anyway. That meant something. Not legally, it meant everything. And I knew it. But beyond the legal meaning, it meant something else. Something that had nothing to do with property or assets or registry documents. It meant he had seen me, clearly and completely and without reservation. In a family where I had spent 30 years learning to take up less space, one person had always seen exactly how much space I deserved. The morning of the will reading, I woke at 5:30. I showered. I dressed carefully, a charcoal blazer, dark trousers. The kind of clothes I wear when I'm presenting forensic findings to a legal panel, which is to say the kind of clothes that communicate I am here in a professional capacity and I know exactly what I am doing. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the blue notebook for the last time before the day began. Then I put it in my bag beside the folder of supporting documents Jonathan had prepared, and I drove across Spokane to the Fernwell building in the gray, early morning light. Raymond's car was already in the parking structure when I arrived. A black Mercedes-Benz E-Class parked in the spot closest to the elevator. He had arrived early. Of course he had. He thought this was already over. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. Jonathan Reardon was waiting in the corridor outside the conference room. He looked at my bag. He looked at my face. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought about the 9-year-old standing in a backyard in Spokane index cards, scattered on the grass, looking up to find her father's chair empty. I thought about a parking lot in Seattle, a handshake that lasted 3 seconds, a watch being checked before I'd finished speaking. I thought about a painting on a living room wall with a branch that simply did not exist. "Yes," I said. I walked into the conference room. Raymond looked up from the far end of the table. He saw me. His expression. Let me step back for a moment. Because before I tell you what happened in that conference room, you need to understand what I had built in the 8 years before I walked through that door. Not because I want to impress you, but because none of what came next would have been possible without it, and because the building of it was, in its own way, the most important part of the story. When I took the position at the Washington State Historical Society at 23 years old, I was the youngest staff researcher they had hired in over a decade. My starting salary was $42,000 a year. I drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a broken rear defroster and lived in a North Spokane apartment with windows that let in the cold in February. I ate a lot of rice and lentils. I bought my work clothes from thrift stores on Division Street and had them tailored at a Vietnamese seamstress shop 2 blocks from my building, whose owner charged me $30 a suit because she said I reminded her of her daughter. I did not mind any of it. I had grown up learning to need very little. It turned out that was a useful skill when you were trying to build something quietly. The work itself was extraordinary from the beginning. Genealogical archival research sounds to most people like a niche academic specialty, the kind of thing practiced by elderly hobbyists tracing their ancestry back to the Mayflower. What it actually is in professional practice is forensic document analysis applied to the question of human identity. Who belonged to whom? Who owned what, who was written in, and who was written out, and whether the writing was honest. I was good at it from my first week. Not good in the way that comes from talent alone. Good in the way that comes from talent combined with a particular kind of hunger. I had spent my entire childhood watching my own family's records be shaped and managed by a man who understood that controlling the narrative meant controlling everything. I knew viscerally and precisely what motivated document alteration. I could read it in the structure of a file the way other people read emotion in a face. Within 2 years, I was handling the most complex cases the Historical Society received: contested estate documents, disputed land records, registry files from families that had been fragmented by immigration, by incarceration, by deliberate erasure. By my 3rd year, I was being brought in as a consultant by 2 law firms in Spokane and 1 in Seattle who needed expert testimony on the authenticity of historical documents in civil litigation. The expert witness work changed everything financially. My consulting rate was $250 an hour in the first year. By year 5, it was $400 an hour, and I was turning down more cases than I accepted. I moved to a better apartment. I paid off my student loans in a single payment in 2021 and sat with the confirmation email open on my screen for a long time, reading it over and over, the way you read something you have been waiting for long enough that it doesn't feel entirely real. I bought a new car. Nothing extravagant, a dark green Subaru Outback that I chose because it had all-wheel drive and good clearance for the mountain roads east of Spokane, where I sometimes drove on weekends to think. I upgraded my work wardrobe properly. I started a retirement account. I started a second savings account that I labeled privately the contingency fund money I set aside without a specific purpose, simply because I had learned early that the people who survive unexpected battles are the ones who prepared for them before they knew the battle was coming. By the time Grandpa Patrick died, I had $114,000 in that contingency fund. I had never touched it. I had never needed to. The professional reputation mattered more than the money in the end. In 8 years of consulting work, I had been involved in 14 contested estate cases. I had testified in court 7 times. My findings had been challenged by opposing counsel on 3 occasions. All 3 challenges had failed. I had a documented record of 100% accuracy in authenticating original documents versus altered copies. a record that Jonathan Reardon had specifically referenced when Grandpa Patrick first approached him about the supplemental testamentary exhibit. He told me Jonathan said during our first meeting in his office that he wanted the registry authenticated by someone whose professional credentials were completely beyond challenge. He said the person he had in mind was not yet qualified when he first conceived the plan. So he waited. He waited. My grandfather had designed a legal structure and then waited for years for me to become the person whose expertise would make it unassailable. I sat with that knowledge for a long time after Jonathan told me. The patience of it, the quiet, absolute faith embedded in it. He had not known exactly how my career would develop. He had simply believed it would develop into something worthy of the task, and he had built the task around that belief. There were 3 other things I had built in those 8 years that mattered on the day of the will reading. The first was a professional relationship with the director of the Washington State Archives, a woman named Dr. Constance Aldrich, who had supervised my postgraduate research, and who, when I called her the week after the memorial service, confirmed within 48 hours that the Dunmore registry documents Raymond had filed with the court showed the specific forensic markers of post-production alteration, ink layering inconsistencies, microabrasion patterns consistent with erasing and overwriting, font weight variations invisible to the naked eye but clearly documented under photographic magnification. She prepared a written report and signed it with her full professional credentials. The second was a contact at Banner Bank in Walla Walla, a branch manager named Howard Tillis, who had processed Grandpa Patrick's safety deposit box access authorization and who confirmed when Jonathan's office contacted him that the original Dunmore registry held in that vault had last been verified intact on October 3rd of the previous year, 6 months before Patrick's death. The third was something simpler. Something that had nothing to do with documents or credentials or legal architecture. It was the knowledge of who I was. Not in the way that self-help books mean when they say that. I mean something more specific. I knew by 31 years old exactly what I was capable of in a room where someone was trying to make me feel small. I had sat across tables from opposing counsel who had questioned my methodology, my credentials, my interpretations, my conclusions. I'd been talked over and talked around and spoken to in the patient, condescending tones that some men use with women they have underestimated. I had learned to wait those moments out, the way you wait out weather, without flinching, without rushing, with the quiet certainty that the clouds always pass and the document record always remains. Raymond Dunmore had spent 31 years treating me like a problem that had resolved itself through irrelevance. He had never once considered that the quiet daughter who read history books at the dinner table and asked too many questions had spent the last 8 years becoming precisely the person you do not want sitting across from you when the truth is on the table. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Fernwell building held 6 people that morning. Jonathan Reardon at the head of the table, flanked by his associate. Raymond on the right side with the family's attorney, a silver-haired man named Garrett Pullman, who had represented Dunmore Property Group for 20 years and who looked, when I walked in, mildly surprised to see me. Colton beside Raymond in a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. Sylvia at the far end, hands folded in her lap, eyes moving between Raymond and the door as though calculating the distance to an exit. And me on the left side of the table, alone, my bag on the chair beside me. Raymond looked at me when I sat down, the same flat measuring look he had given me across 30 years of dinners and family gatherings and parking lots outside graduation ceremonies. The look that said, "You are here because you have to be. You will leave with nothing because there is nothing for you to leave with." He had no idea what was in my bag. Jonathan Reardon opened the folder in front of him, cleared his throat. Before we proceed to the formal reading, he said, "There are several preliminary matters that require the room's attention." Raymond glanced at Garrett Pullman, a small, confident glance, the glance of a man who has reviewed the paperwork and found it satisfactory. "Of course," Raymond said smoothly. "Whatever you need." Jonathan looked at me. I reached into my bag, and I put the blue notebook on the table. The blue notebook sat in the center of the table. No one spoke for several seconds. Raymond looked at it. His eyes moved from the notebook to my face, then back to the notebook. Something shifted in his expression. Not panic, not yet. More like the first flicker of recognition. The moment a man realizes the terrain he thought he knew has changed beneath his feet. Colton leaned forward slightly. Garrett Pullman adjusted his glasses. Jonathan Reardon spoke first. "What I am holding," he said, and opened the notebook to the first page, "is a document registered with the state of Washington as a supplemental testamentary exhibit to the estate of Patrick Dunmore. It was authenticated and notarized on March 19th, 2010 in this office. I was the witnessing attorney. The notarial certification was provided by the late Judge Patricia Olson of Spokane County." He turned the notebook to face the room. "The registration number is on the first page. Anyone is welcome to verify it with the state archive." Garrett Pullman was already writing something on his legal pad. Fast, precise strokes. Not notes, a question he was preparing. Under Washington state law, Jonathan continued, "A supplemental testamentary exhibit registered prior to the testator's death carries the same legal weight as the primary will document. Its designations are binding and cannot be superseded by any subsequently filed registry amendment, including amendments filed with county records." He let that sentence settle. Raymond's jaw tightened. A small movement, almost imperceptible. Almost. "I've never seen that document before," Raymond said. His voice was steady, practiced. "I was not informed of its existence." "You were not intended to be," Jonathan said simply. He turned to the last page of entries. He placed the notebook flat on the table so that everyone in the room could see it clearly. The handwriting was unmistakably Patrick Dunmore's. Anyone who had ever received a letter or a birthday card from my grandfather would have recognized it immediately. The black ink entries filling most of the pages. And there, near the bottom of the final page, in a different color entirely, red ink, deliberate and clear, Iris Margaret Dunmore, primary heir, family seat by merit of character and continuity of purpose. Sylvia made a sound. Small and involuntary, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally, without meaning to, exhaled. Colton sat back in his chair. He said nothing. He was looking at the notebook with an expression I had never seen on him before, the expression of a man recalculating rapidly the structural integrity of something he had believed was solid. Raymond looked at me. This time, the look was different. The flatness was gone. In its place was something raw, not guilt, not remorse. Something more like fury, held just barely below the surface, compressed into the specific stillness of a man who refuses to let a room see him come apart. "This changes nothing," he said. The registry documents filed with the county clearly established Mr. Dunmore. Jonathan's voice was quiet but absolute. "I need to show you something else." He opened the manila envelope. He laid 3 documents on the table in a row. The first was a photographic analysis report prepared by Dr. Constance Aldrich of the Washington State Archives. 12 pages. detailed forensic notation of the registry documents Raymond had filed with the court, the ink layering inconsistencies, the microabrasion patterns, the font weight variations that appeared under photographic magnification. Her conclusion stated in the plain language required of expert reports occupied the final paragraph of page 12. The documents submitted to Spokane County Superior Court on April 29th of this year are not original records. They are altered copies. The alterations are made post-production with the deliberate intention of changing the identity of the designated heir. The original records, as they existed prior to alteration, are preserved in the certified archive described below. The second document was the chain of custody certificate from Banner Bank in Walla Walla, confirming the existence, location, and unbroken integrity of the original Dunmore registry held in the safety deposit box since 2012. The third document was a certified copy of that original registry. Every page, every entry, including on the final page the notation in my grandfather's handwriting that Raymond had removed from the version he filed with the court. My name, present, unaltered, exactly where it had always been. Raymond stared at the three documents for a long time. Garrett Pullman had stopped writing. He was reading Dr. Aldrich's report with the careful, controlled attention of an attorney who has just understood the shape of the problem he is sitting inside. Raymond, Garrett's voice was low, I need a moment with my client. There is one additional matter, Jonathan said, before any private consultations take place. He produced a final document from the envelope, a single page. Under Washington state law, filing a fraudulent document with a probate court in order to influence the distribution of an estate constitutes a Class B felony. I have prepared a referral summary for the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office. He set it on the table. Whether that referral is submitted is not my decision. It is Miss Dunmore's. Every head in the room turned toward me. Raymond looked at me across the table. For the first time in my life, the first time in 31 years, he looked at me with something that might in another man have been fear. I let the silence last. 10 seconds, 15. I won't be submitting the referral, I said, on one condition. Colton exhaled. Raymond did not move. You will sign a notarized statement acknowledging that the documents you filed with the court were altered versions of the original Dunmore registry. You will acknowledge that my name was removed from those documents deliberately and without legal justification, and you will acknowledge in writing that I am and have always been a legal member of the Dunmore family. I kept my voice even. The statement will be filed with the court as part of the estate record. It will be public. Garrett Pullman looked at Raymond. A long, careful look. Raymond's hands were flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at the blue notebook, at my grandfather's handwriting, at the red ink entry, at the 15 years of preparation compressed into a single page. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice had lost the practiced smoothness entirely. What was left underneath was something older and smaller and far less impressive. Fine, he said, one word. No qualification, no negotiation. The word of a man who has run out of moves and knows it. Jonathan nodded once and began gathering the documents. I looked at the blue notebook one more time before Jonathan closed it. My grandfather's handwriting on the last page. The red ink, steady and clear, and exactly as he had left it 15 years ago, certain even then that one day this room would happen and that when it did, the truth would still be there exactly where he had put it. He had been right. He had always been right. That was the moment I finally let myself cry. Not in the conference room, I held it until I was in the elevator alone, descending 14 floors. in the quiet of a Wednesday morning in Spokane. Then I pressed my back against the elevator wall and I cried for about 45 seconds for my grandfather, for the child who had dropped her index cards in a backyard 30 years ago, for every version of myself that had learned to need less and take up less space and expect nothing. The elevator doors opened, I walked out into the lobby, and I went to work. The notarized statement was signed 11 days later. Raymond Dunmore sat across from a notary public in Jonathan Reardon's conference room and signed his name to a document that stated, in plain legal language, that he had deliberately altered the Dunmore family registry, deliberately removed his daughter's name from the records filed with the court, and that Iris Margaret Dunmore was and had always been a full and legitimate member of the Dunmore family. I was not in the room when he signed it. I had chosen not to be. Not out of mercy, I simply didn't need to watch. The document was what mattered. The record was what mattered. I had spent 8 years working in a field that had taught me one thing above all others. The moment is temporary, but the document is permanent. I didn't need to see his face. I needed his signature. And I got it. Jonathan filed it with the court the same afternoon. 3 days after that, the formal estate distribution was finalized. The Cresthaven Drive property transferred to my name. 31% of the liquid estate assets, $260,000 after legal fees deposited into an account Jonathan had prepared. The remaining estate, including Raymond's existing stake in Dunmore Property Group, was distributed as the primary will specified. Raymond kept his business. Colton kept his condominium and his involvement in the company. What Colton did not keep was the $412,000 he had received in advance draws against his anticipated inheritance over the previous 6 years. Raymond had authorized those draws against assets that, under the corrected distribution, were no longer solely his to authorize. Jonathan's letter to Colton's attorney was precise and unambiguous. The amount was to be repaid to the estate within 18 months with interest. I heard about Colton's reaction secondhand from Aunt Cecilia, who heard it from a cousin in Walla Walla. He had apparently sat in his South Hill condominium for an entire afternoon without speaking to anyone. Then he had called Raymond, and the call had lasted 40 minutes and had not gone well for either of them. I will admit that I felt something when I heard that. Not pleasure, exactly. More like the specific satisfaction of watching a structure that was built on false assumptions finally encounter the weight of accurate ones. Raymond called me 6 days after the statement was filed. I was at my desk at the Historical Society, reviewing a land allotment dispute for a family in eastern Washington. My phone lit up with his name the first time he had called me directly in over 2 years. I looked at him for a moment. Then I answered. Iris. His voice was different on the phone than it had been in the conference room. Lower, more careful. The practiced smoothness was still partially there. Raymond Dunmore did not shed 30 years of habit in 11 days, but underneath it was something that had not been there before. A structural uncertainty, the sound of a man who no longer knows exactly where the ground is. Raymond, I said. A pause. I want you to know. He stopped, started again. What happened, wasn't? It was never intended to be a reflection of another stop. The sentence had no ending that worked, and he knew it. You filed a sworn affidavit stating I was never a legal member of this family, I said. I kept my voice completely level. You commissioned a painting for your father's memorial service with my name removed. You spent approximately a decade systematically altering the family records. A pause. Which part of that was not intended? Silence. I'm not calling to argue, he said finally. I know, I said. So why are you calling? Another long pause. I heard him exhale slowly, the exhale of a man confronting a question he has no good answer to. I don't know, he said. And for the first time in my life, I believed Raymond Dunmore completely. Then I'm going to go back to work, I said. Take care of yourself. I hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone face down on my desk. Outside my office window, Spokane's downtown, spread out under a gray November sky, the Spokane River catching what light there was and holding it in brief silver flashes between the bridges. I felt very clearly and completely that I was done. Not done in the way of closing a door in anger, done in the way of finishing something, setting it down cleanly after carrying it for a long time and feeling the absence of the weight, not as loss, but as relief. Sylvia came to my apartment 2 weeks later. She called first, which I appreciated. She asked if she could come. I said yes. She sat at my kitchen table and held a cup of tea with both hands and looked at the surface of the table for a long time before she spoke. I knew he was going to file the affidavit, she said. He told me what he was planning. A year before he did it. She looked up. I didn't stop him. I know, I said. I told myself it was just a legal formality, that it wouldn't really affect you. She shook her head slowly. That was a lie, I told myself, because the truth was harder. What was the truth? She was quiet for a moment. That I was afraid of him, she said. That I had been afraid of him for a very long time, and that being afraid of someone is not the same as not loving them. But it does the same damage. She set down her cup. I'm sorry, Iris. I have been sorry for much longer than you know. I just never had the courage to say it out loud. I looked at my mother across the kitchen table, at the lines around her eyes, and the gray in her hair, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent decades performing a version of herself she never fully believed in. I didn't forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a long, slow process that happens mostly in private, mostly without the other person present. But I heard her. Completely and without reservation, I heard her. I'm not ready to have you in my life the way you used to be, I said. But I'm not closing the door, she nodded. She didn't ask for more than that. We finished our tea in a quiet that was not comfortable exactly, but was honest. That felt to me like a beginning of something, not the something we had never had, but a different something built on different ground, with both of us knowing exactly what the ground was made of this time. She left at 7 in the evening. I washed the cups and stood at the kitchen window and watched her car pull away down the street. The confrontation with Colton was shorter and considerably less nuanced. He came to the Historical Society on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead. I looked up from my desk, and he was standing in the doorway of my office, still handsome, still broad-shouldered, the easy manner, slightly less easy than it had always been. $412,000, he said. $412,000. I confirmed. He looked at me for a long moment. I could see him cycling through options negotiation, appeal the particular charm he had deployed successfully his entire life against people who were predisposed to give him what he wanted. I was not predisposed. You could ask Jonathan to restructure the repayment, he said finally. Extend the timeline. I said, will you? I considered it for exactly as long as it deserved. No, I said. He nodded once, a tight, controlled nod. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway without another word. I watched him go, the broad shoulders, the unhurried walk, the careful performance of a man who refuses to let anyone see him rattled, and I felt nothing complicated at all. I turned back to my work. the land allotment dispute was waiting. A family in eastern Washington trying to reclaim a record that someone had decided didn't matter, trying to prove that a name belonged where it had always belonged. I picked up my pen. I knew exactly how to help them. I moved into the Cresthaven house on a Saturday in January. Not immediately after the estate was settled, I had taken 3 months, partly for practical reasons, and partly because I needed the time to decide what the house was going to mean. A building is not just a building when it carries the weight of a specific history. I had learned that from years of working with families who had fought over properties, not because of their monetary value, but because of what they represented, who had been seen inside them, who had been excluded, who had left their mark on the walls and the floors, and the light that came through particular windows at particular times of day. The Cresthaven house represented something complicated for me. It was the house where I had been invisible. It was also the house where Grandpa Patrick had sat in his study on warm July afternoons and shown me the blue notebook and taught me slowly and deliberately everything I would one day need to know. I decided in the end that the second thing was larger than the first, so I moved in.
The first thing I changed was the living room wall. Raymond had taken the new painting when he vacated. Jonathan had confirmed it was his personal property, not part of the estate. The wall was bare when I arrived, a large pale rectangle where the paint had been protected from years of light. I left it bare for a month. I wanted to live with the empty space before I decided what to fill it with. Eventually, I hung 3 things in its place. A large topographic map of Spokane County framed in dark wood. A photograph of Grandpa Patrick, taken in the 1970s, standing in front of the first property he had ever purchased on the east side of the city, squinting into the sun with the expression of a man who has just decided something permanent. And a small framed print of County Kerry, Ireland, the same image that had hung above his desk for 40 years, which I had quietly taken from the study the night of the memorial service and kept in my apartment ever since. No family tree, not yet. Maybe not ever, at least not in the form Raymond had always commissioned. If I hang a family tree one day, it will be one I document myself, every name verified. Every line confirmed, every entry honest. That feels right to me. Grandpa Patrick's study became my home office. I kept his desk, I kept the leather armchair, I kept the photograph albums and the ledger shelf and the locked filing cabinet, which I had rekeyed and now use for my own case files. The cedar smell is still there, faintly underneath the smell of my coffee and my books, and the particular dry warmth of the heating system at a house built in the 1960s. I sit at his desk every morning before I leave for the Historical Society. Sometimes I read, sometimes I work, sometimes I just sit in the quiet of the room and think about the specific kind of patience it takes to build something over 15 years on behalf of someone else. To design a structure you may not live to see used and to trust without evidence that the person you built it for will be equal to the moment when it matters. He was right to trust me. I think about that often, not with pride exactly, more with a specific kind of responsibility. He was right to trust me, which means I have an obligation to continue being someone worth that trust. Not for him, he's gone, for myself, for the work, for the families I sit across from every day who need someone to tell them that the truth of who they are has not been destroyed just because someone tried to rewrite it. And the nonprofit took shape slowly across the first year in the house. I used a portion of the inheritance, $80,000, to establish a small archival restoration center operating out of Spokane in partnership with the Historical Society.
We work specifically with families whose identity records have been lost, altered, or deliberately suppressed, immigrant families navigating naturalization document disputes, Indigenous families reclaiming land allotment records, adoptees seeking original birth certificates sealed by outdated laws, families separated by incarceration whose vital records were never properly maintained. We have helped 43 families in the first year, 43 sets of names restored to records that had erased them. I think Grandpa Patrick would have considered that a reasonable use of the money. Cecilia Voss drives up from Walla Walla once a month. She is 79 years old, and she drives a 20-year-old Buick at exactly the speed limit, and she brings without fail a tin of Scottish shortbread that she makes herself from a recipe she says came from the Dunmore family's County Kerry origins. We sit in the kitchen and drink tea, and she tells me stories about Patrick Dunmore that I have never heard before, the young man who arrived in Spokane with $40 and a stubbornness that bordered on legendary, who made mistakes and learned from them and kept meticulous records of both. She told me on one of those afternoons that he had known from the time I was very small that Raymond was going to be a problem. Not because Raymond was a bad man in every dimension, Cecilia is careful about, that the way that people who have lived long enough to understand complexity tend to be careful, but because Raymond was a frightened man who had mistaken control for strength his entire life, and frightened men who mistake control for strength will eventually do something that cannot be undone. Patrick used to say, Cecilia told me, stirring her tea, that the only reliable counter to a man who rewrites the record is a person who knows how to read it. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. He was very patient about waiting for that person to be ready. I thought about the 9-year-old standing in the backyard with scattered index cards, about the 17-year-old driving alone to Seattle in a car with a broken defroster, about the years of quiet work and careful preparation and the specific discipline of building something solid when the people around you have decided you are not worth the investment. I was a slow project, I said. Cecilia laughed a real laugh, clear and unhurried. The best ones always are, she said. I still have the blue notebook. It sits on the corner of Grandpa Patrick's desk in the study, in the spot where the certified copy of the registry used to sit before Raymond took it. I have not put it away. I have not framed it or displayed it or treated it as a trophy. It is simply there the way a compass is simply there, not something you look at constantly, but something you know the location of, something whose presence is a quiet reassurance that you know which direction is true north. Someday I will archive it properly. Document its provenance, its chain of custody, its role in the estate proceedings. I will do it with the same care I bring to every record I handle methodically, completely without sentiment getting in the way of accuracy, but not yet. For now, it stays on the corner of the desk, in the room that smells of cedar and old paper and 40 years of a man who believed without wavering that the truth is worth the trouble of preserving it. I believe that too. I always have. I just needed to find out in the hardest possible way that the belief was enough to build a life on. It was. It is. That is the only inheritance that has ever mattered. Someone tried to erase my name from the record of this family. They were patient about it, and they were thorough, and they were wrong. Not because the truth is always louder than the lie, sometimes it isn't, but because one person a long time ago decided that the truth was worth protecting, and he was right. He built something that lasted. So can you. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If the story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight to prove you belonged somewhere? How did you find the strength to keep going? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.